Hello my dear students, in last video we have seen analysis of algorithm part 1. In that video we have seen what is algorithm, what do you mean by analysis of algorithm and why we require analysis and which parameters we are going to consider for analysis of algorithm. So in this video means analysis of algorithm part 2, I am going to cover time complexity, frequency count, and by using frequency count how we can calculate time complexity with the help of examples. So let's see first of all what is time complexity. We can say amount of time, total amount of time taken by the algorithm for performing any task, that is the time complexity. Actually, total amount of time is depends upon the which processors we are using for executing that task. Okay, and which compilers we are using for performing that task. So mostly while calculating time complexity, we are going to consider number of times a specific instruction set is executed. So if there are different instructions, 4 to 5 instructions in the algorithm, so how many times each and every instruction will execute, that we will calculate and that we will consider for while calculating the time complexity. So to calculate time complexity, we need to calculate frequency count. So let's see what do you mean by frequency count. So frequency count means number of times a statement is to be executed with an algorithm. Suppose in algorithm there are different statements. So we need to consider each and every statement, how many times that statement will execute, that we can consider as a frequency count. So depends on which statement is there in the algorithm, that statement will execute. So if in an algorithm comments is written, then that comments will execute 0 times. No need to execute that particular comments. Why we are writing comments? Mostly for description of that code. Okay, so it will for frequency count for that comments will be 0. And for declaration also we are considering frequency count as a 0. If you want to declare some variables, okay, in a code, okay, for that purpose your frequency count will be 0. Then next, for return statements, if you are returning any value like this, return 0 means you are returning value 0 where this function is called. Okay, so that type of statement. The next, assignment statement. So assignment statement is like this: we are assigning value 10 to A. So this is the assignment test statement where we are using this assignment operator for assigning this value to this variable. So for this statement also one time, okay, means return time and assignment time will execute one time always. Okay, if any function is called, suppose function name is add for performing addition of two numbers, and this function is called. Okay, so if you pass n for this function, okay, then this function will call n time. Okay, suppose this function will call n times like this, add, okay, then that we will execute 3 times. Okay, this we will execute one time, this will execute one time, this will execute one time. So this function will call n times. जितने टाइम वो एग्जीक्यूट होगा, जितने टाइम वो कॉल होगा, उतने टाइम वो एग्जीक्यूट होगा. Okay, then next, begin, end and go to statement. That statement will execute only one time. Okay, and conditional statement and loop statement, all the statements are depends upon the condition written in a code. Okay, suppose condition is I is less than 10 and initial value of I is 10, and every time we need to increment I. So how many time it will execute? Suppose initial value of I is 0. So 0 to 9 times the statements will execute. So it depends upon the condition. Okay, that's why here is written condition and loop statement depends upon the given condition. Okay, and By using all these things, we can calculate the frequency count. After calculation of frequency count, how we can calculate the time complexity? So for that, suppose frequency count is 2 n raised to 2 plus 1. This is the frequency count. Okay, so by using this frequency count, if you want to calculate the time complexity, how we can calculate? So from this expression, you need to find out the term which having highest exponent. So in this term, highest exponent is n square. Okay, 2 is the highest exponent. Okay, so we need to consider this term while calculating the time complexity. Okay, that is written here. Consider the term which has highest exponent while calculation of time complexity. Second thing, you need to ignore the constant multiplier, and then we will write down the time complexity. So in this case, constant multiplier for this term is 2. Okay, so this 2 we will ignore, and then we will write down time complexity as a big O of n square. Big O is one of the asymptotic notation. There are three asymptotic notation. First one is big O, big omega, okay, and theta. Okay, so that three things are there. So this big O we are using for average time complexity. Sorry, for worst time complexity. Okay, so each and every instructions we are going to consider, and then we will find out the frequency count. That's why this big O we are using. Okay, because it will represent the worst time complexity. Okay, so in this way we can find out the time complexity. So let's see this with the help of examples. First of all, we'll take this first example, which is simple one. Okay, so here int a, then value 10 value is assigned to a, then we are displaying value of a. Okay, three steps, these three instructions are written there, three statements are written here. Okay, so this is the declaration statement. So while calculating frequency count, declaration statement, how many time it will execute? 0 time. We are just declaring the variables which you required for performing any operation. So this will execute 0 time. Okay, then this is the assignment statement. We are assigning 10 value to a. So this we can say as an assignment statement. So assignment statement, how many times it will execute? It will execute 1 time. Okay, so for assignment statement, 1 time. So this I am writing frequency count. Frequency count for this statement is 0. Frequency count for this statement is 1. Now next, here we are just displaying a. So how many times it will execute? Only 1 time. Okay, so total frequency count, if you want to calculate, you need to add all these things. That is, frequency count is equal to 0 plus 1 plus 1. Okay, that is 2. Okay, 2 is the frequency count for this example. So here is the only constant. So this we can say as a constant time complexity. And in that case, you can write down time complexity as a big O of 1. And this type of complexity we can say as a constant time complexity. Constant value is there for the frequency count. See, this frequency we have calculated for a single statement. If you want to calculate frequency for all these codes, you need to add that frequency for each and every statement and find out the total frequency count, and by using that we can calculate the time complexity. So time complexity for this is big O of 1, that we can say as a constant time complexity. Now next, take this example, okay, where we have initialized I here, okay, and value of 3 is initialized as, value of n is initialized as a 3. So here here is the assignment statement. So how many time assignment statement will execute? 1 time. Okay, here is the declaration statement. it will execute 0 times, but here assignment statement 2, so it will execute 1 time. So frequency count for this particular statement is 1. Now consider this for loop. We need to find out how many times statement which is inside of this for loop will execute, and how many times this condition will execute, that we need to find out. So how we can find out it? Initially value of I will be 0, okay, and value of n is written here, that is 3, n value is 3, okay. So which condition we need to check? Whether I is less than equal to n or not, and the statement inside of it will execute or not. The 3 things we need to consider for calculating frequency count of this for loop, okay. So initially value of I is 0, okay. So if you are considering initial value as a 0, 0 is less than equal to, what is the value of n? Value of n is 3. So is this a true? This is true. That's why the statement inside of a for loop will execute. Means this statement will execute which is inside of a for loop, okay. Then value of I will increment. Here we have written, okay, I plus plus. So every time I value will increment, okay, up to this condition is satisfied. So value of I is 1. Now 1 is, value of I is 1, value of n is 3. So 1 is less than equal to 3. So this condition is true. So again the statement will execute. If this condition is true, program counter will go inside of that for loop and execute all the statement written in that for loop, okay. So this statement will execute. Now value of I will increment. So value of I will be 2, okay. So value of I is 2. 2 is less than equal to value of n is 3. Is this is true? Yes, this is true. So it will go, program counter will go inside and this statement will execute. Now value of I will be 3. Now value of I is 3, value of n is again 3. 3 is less than equal to 3? Yes, it is true. So again the statement will execute. Value of I will increment. So what is the value of I? Value of I is 4 right now, okay. So value of I is 4, less than equal to value of n is 3. Is this a true? No, it is not true. It is false. So it will not go inside of a for loop, okay, and it will not execute the statement, okay. Means see, by using this we can find out how many times this will execute. See, value of n is 3, and how many times this will execute? This for loop will execute 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 times this condition is executed, okay. So 5 times means how many times? 3 plus 2 times. Value of n is 3, okay. Means n plus 2 times this condition will execute, okay. Why we are considering n plus 2? Because 5 times this is executing and value of n is 3. So we will write down 3 plus 2 as a 5, and value of 3 is, value of n is 3. So we can write down here n plus 2 times this condition will execute. Then whatever the statement inside of the for loop, how many times it will execute? 1, 2, 3, 4 times. When value of n is 3. 4 times it will execute and value of n is 3. So we can write down like this, 3 plus 1 time this will execute. Means n plus 1 time this will execute in a generalized way, okay. So this statement will execute n plus 1 time, okay. So this is regarding for loop and whatever the statement inside of that for loop. Now consider this statement. This statement is the return statement. So return statement, how many times it will execute? 1 time. So this statement will execute 1 time. Now this is the frequency count for each and every statement of this code. Now how we can calculate the total frequency count? For that we need to add all this frequency count. So 1 plus n plus 2 plus n plus 1 plus 5. Sorry, plus 1. Okay, so what will the total frequency count? 2 plus 1, 3, 4, 5. So this constant will be 5 and this n plus 1, that is 2n. So 2n plus 5. Okay, so this is the total frequency count for this example. Now by using this total frequency count, we need to calculate the time complexity. So how we can calculate the time complexity? We need to find out, we need to consider the term which has the highest exponent. So here two terms are there which having highest exponent, this one, n raised to 1. Here we can consider n raised to as a 0 because value of n raised to 0 is 1. Okay, so highest exponent is 1. So we need to consider this term, that is 2n. This term we need to consider for calculation of time complexity. And then second step, you need to ignore the constant multiplier. So this we need to ignore. And we need to write down big O of n. So big O of n is the time complexity for this code. All of you understand? First of all, we need to calculate the frequency count and we need to consider the highest exponent term from that frequency count, and then we will find out what is the time complexity. Okay, so this is regarding this example. Let's see this example for while loop. So here is the first one is the assignment statement. So how many times this assignment statement will execute? One time. Okay, assignment statement will execute only one time. Okay, so one time this will execute, and while z is greater than equal to 1. Okay, inside that z minus minus. So if this condition is true, this statement will execute. Okay, so let's see the execution of this. How many times this condition will execute and how many times whatever the instruction inside of the while loop will execute. So value of z is 4. And which condition we need to take? Z is greater than equal to 1. So statement which is inside of a for loop, how many times it will execute, that we need to find out. So value of z is initially 4, which is written here. Okay, so value of z is 4. So 4 is greater than equal to 1. This statement, this condition is true. So program control will go inside and value of z will decrement. So what will the value of z? That is 3. Okay, so value of z will be 3. Means this statement will execute, which is written inside of the for loop. Sorry, while loop. Okay, then value of z is 3 now. Okay, so 3 is greater than equal to 1. Again this is true. Okay, so whatever the written inside of the while loop will execute and value of z will be decrement. So value of z will be 2 here. Okay, so value of z is 2. 2 is greater than equal to 1. Is the statement is true? Yes. So program control will go inside and again value of z will decrease by 1. So right now it is 2, it is decreased by 1, that is 2. And this statement which is inside of while loop will execute. Again what happened? Value of z will be 1. So it will check this condition. 1 is greater than equal to 1. Yes, this is true. Okay. So if it is true, whatever the statement inside of the while loop will execute. Okay, and value of z will be 0. So again the statement will check. Value of z is 0. 0 is greater than equal to 1. No, this condition is not true. This will not execute. So how many times this condition will execute? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. 5 times and value of z is 4. So in generalized way we can write down this as a 4 plus 1. So in generalized way you can write down n plus 1 time this statement will execute. Okay, and whatever the inside of it, how many times it will execute? 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 times this statement will execute, means n times this statement will execute. Okay, so this statement will execute n time, this will execute n plus 1 time, and this will execute 1 time. So this is the execution of each and every statement in this code. Now what we need to find out? Frequency count, total frequency count for this example. So we need to find out, we need to add a frequency count for each and every statement. For first statement it is 1, next it is n plus 1, and for next it is n. So total frequency count n plus 1, that is 2n plus 2. So this is the total frequency count for this example. So by using this frequency count, we can calculate the time complexity. So what we need to consider? We need to consider term which having highest exponent. So here is the term which having highest exponent, that is 1. Okay, so we'll consider that term only. Okay, and we need to ignore constant multipliers. And then we can write down like this, big O of n. Why we require big O of n? Because in big O of 1, big O we are considering for representing worst case time complexity. Worst case means maximum time, how many times this each and every statement will execute. Okay, and that we are calculating. That's why we have written big O here. So time complexity for this is big O of n. So we will see some more example regarding time complexity. Now see this example. So in this example, 2 for loops are there. Another one example is there where 3 for loops are there. So let's see first of all this nested for loop example and what will the time complexity for same. So here value of I is initially 0. Okay, and we need to find out whether value of I is less than n or not. If it is less than n, then program control will go inside and will execute this statement. Okay, so consider value of n as a 3. Okay, for calculating frequency count, we are considering value of n as a 3. Okay, and whatever the statement inside of the for loop, how many times it will execute if value of n is 3. So initially value of I is 0. Okay, so value of I is 0 at this stage. Okay, and value of n is 3. So 0 is less than c. If this condition is true, so this program control will go inside and will execute this instruction. Okay, which is written inside of this for loop. Okay, then value of I will increment. Okay, value of I will be 1. So 1 is less than 3. Value of I is 1. Value of n is 3. 1 is less than 3. So this condition is also true. Program control will go inside of it. Okay, and whatever the statement which is written inside of the for loop will execute. Now value of I will be 2. We will increment value. Value of I is 2. 2 is less than 3. Yes, it is true. The statement will execute which is written in for loop. Now value of I will be 3. Okay. So is 3 is less than 3? Value of I is 3. Value of n is 3. Is 3 is less than 3? No. So the statement which are written inside of the for loop will not execute. Okay, means this condition will execute 4 times. Okay, this condition will execute 4 times. Means in generalized way it will execute 3 plus 1 time. Means how many times it will execute? N plus 1 time. Okay, this will execute n plus 1 time. Okay, and whatever the statement written inside of this for loop, how many times it will execute? 1, 2, 3 times. So value of n is 3. Means this will execute n time. So this will execute n time. This will execute n time. Okay, because of this for loop. Consider this is only one statement. Okay, so whatever the statement written inside of the for loop will execute n time. That's why we have written this will execute n time. Okay, now consider for loop which is inside of this for loop. Nested for loop is there. So consider only this for loop now. Okay, so for j will start with 0, we need to check whether j is less than n or not, and we need to check whether the statement inside of the for loop will execute how many times. Okay, so consider value of n is 2. So initially value of j is 0. Okay, so 0, value of j is 0, 0 is less than 2 or not? Yes, it is true. So this statement which is written inside of this for loop will execute. Now value of j will increment. Okay, so value of j will be 1. 1 is less than 2. Yes, true. So statement which is inside of for loop will execute. Then value of j will be 2. So 2 is less than 2. No, this is not true. So whatever the statement inside of the for loop will not execute. So how many times this will execute? 1, 2, 3 times. This for loop will execute 3 times. Okay. So what is the value of n? Value of n is 2. 3 times matlab 2 plus 1 time. So this we can consider as n. N plus 1 time this conditions will execute. So we can consider this will execute n plus 1 time. Okay, and because of this for loop, this statement will execute n time. So while calculating frequency count, you need to multiply this n with n plus 1 to calculate frequency count of this particular condition. Okay, and whatever the statement inside of the for loop will execute how many times? 2 times. So 2 times means n times it will execute because of this for loop. So that also you need to multiply here. Okay. So initially what we have done, this is the for loop and inside that only one statement is there. We have calculated frequency count for this statement, that is n. We have considered it as a n. And because of this another for loop, how many times this condition will execute? N plus 1 time. So you need to multiply this with n. Okay, same for the statement which is written inside of this for loop, that is this one. We need to multiply n with this. Okay, so this is the frequency count for the statement. So to calculate total frequency count, you need to add this frequency count of each and every statement. So for statement frequency count is n plus 1 plus, for this statement frequency count is n into n plus 1 plus, for this statement frequency count is n into n. Okay, so total frequency count for this is n plus 1 plus n square, n into n square plus n. Okay, plus this n into n is n square. So total frequency count is 2n square plus n square, that is 2n square plus n plus n, that is 2n plus 1. Okay, so this is total frequency count for this example. Now we have calculated total frequency count. Now we need to calculate time complexity for same. So for calculating time complexity, what we need to do? We need to consider the term from a frequency count which having highest exponent. So this is a term which having highest exponent, that is 2n square. Okay, after considering that term, we need to ignore the constant multiplier. Okay, and we need to consider n square here for this example, and then write down big O of n square. So big O of n square, this is time complexity for this example. This is nested for loop. Okay, now we will consider another one example where 3 for loops are there. Okay. So you can see here value of I is 0, I is less than n, I plus plus. Same for this for loop also, value of j is 0, j is less than n, j plus plus. Value of k is 0, k is less than n, k plus plus. Variables are different, but initial value and conditions are same. So if you calculate how many times this for loop will execute and whatever the inside for loop will execute, that will be applicable for these two for loops also. And same example we have taken here also. The condition is same. You can see I equal to 0, I is less than n, I plus plus. And inside that statements are there. So we have already calculated number of times this for loop, this condition, and inside that whatever the statement are there, how many times it will execute. So this will execute n plus 1 time, and whatever the statement written inside it, it will execute n time. So we can consider here frequency count as a n plus 1. You can calculate like this also. Initial value is 0. Okay, and suppose value of n is 3. Okay, so what we need to consider? 0 is less than 3, that you need to consider first. Then we need to consider value will be increment, 1 is less than 3, value will increment, 2 is less than 3, condition is true, then 3 is less than 3, this condition will fall. So how many time it will execute? 3 times, means it will execute n times. Okay, sorry, how many times it will execute? 4 times, means it will execute n plus 1 time. Like this also you can calculate easily. Okay, and whatever the statement inside of this for loop, how many times execute? 1, 2, 3, because only these 3 conditions are satisfied, and when conditions are satisfied, conditions are true, in that case only statement inside of the for loop will execute. Okay, so statement which is inside of this for loop will execute n time. So consider this only one statement. So because of this for loop, this will execute n time, this will execute n time, and this will also execute n time because of this for loop. Okay, consider this is only one statement. So whatever the statement inside of this for loop will execute n time. Now consider this for loop. Okay, this for loop. So what is the condition here? J is equal to 0, j is less than n, j plus plus, like this. So how many times this condition will execute? It will execute n plus 1 time, like this. Okay, so you need to multiply here n plus 1 time. Okay, this will execute n plus 1 time. So whatever the statement inside of this for loop, that also will execute n time. Okay, you have written here statement inside of it will execute n time. So this will also execute n time. So you can write down here n. Okay, n. By considering only this for loop, whatever statement written inside it, that will execute n time. Now consider only this for loop. Don't consider this for loop, and don't consider for loop which is outside of this for loop. Okay, just consider this for loop. If you are considering this for loop, how many times this condition will execute? N plus 1 time. Okay, so you need to multiply that with this one, because this is nested loop. Okay, and inside of that statement, how many times it will execute? N time, because of this for loop. Okay, so because of this for loop, this statement will execute n time. Because of this for loop, this statement will execute n time, and because of this for loop, again this statement will execute n time. So total how many times this statement will execute? N cube times. Okay, so how we can calculate the total time complexity here? Just we need to add this frequency count. Okay, to calculate total frequency count. Total frequency count is equal to, this is the first term n plus 1, plus this is second term n into n plus 1. Okay, plus third term, that is n into n, that is n square, into n plus 1, this is third one, and last one, that is n cube. Okay, so you can elaborate more regarding this. N plus 1, n into n, that is n square. Okay, plus n into 1, that is n, plus n square into n, that is n cube, plus n square into 1, that is n square plus n cube. Okay, so this is the frequency count, total frequency count for this example. Now by using this total frequency count, we need to find out, this is total frequency count, we need to find out time complexity. So first type of time complexity, we need to find out which term which having highest exponent. So here is the term which having highest exponent. Highest exponent is 3. Okay, so after that what we need to do, we need to ignore the constant multiplier. Here 1 is the constant multiplier, we need to ignore it, and then we can write down time complexity as big O of n cube. Okay, so big O of n cube, that is the time complexity for this example. Okay, so there are different types of time complexity. First one is the constant time complexity. Okay, constant time complexity, that is big O of 1. Okay, if you'll get frequency count as a constant, that we can say as a constant time complexity, and that we can represent like this, big O of 1. Second one is the linear time complexity. Okay, so we can represent linear time complexity as a big O of n. We have seen example for this. Okay, the next one is the quadratic time complexity. Okay, we can represent it as a big O of n square. We have seen that example here, big O of n square. The next one is the cubic time complexity, that is big O of n cube. Okay, so we have seen that example here, big O of n cube. So these are the different types of time complexity. First one is time complexity is the constant time complexity, big O of 1. Linear time complexity, big O of n. Quadratic time complexity, big O of n square. Cubic time complexity, big O of n cube. So if you like my video, kindly like, share and subscribe my channel. Till then, take care. Bye bye.